My name's Nick Parry. I'm the head of lived experience engagement and integration at Roses in the Ocean, and I'm joined by.
Hi, my name is Julia, and I'm administrator with Nick.
Yeah, and I'm delighted to welcome you all, and even more delighted to welcome James Gallagher, who has participated in numerous speaking engagements with Roses in the Ocean and independently. He is a highly experienced speaker, and he will be leading the session today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting today and acknowledge that we all come from different lands. I'm coming to you today with Julia from Yagara and Turrbal People's Country on Mianjin land, and we pay our respects to elders past and present, and we extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who have joined us on this session today. I'd also like to acknowledge everybody's lived experience of suicide who's joined us today, and would like to acknowledge your insights, perspectives, and invaluable contributions that you will be bringing to today's session and to suicide prevention more broadly. So thank you for that. And I'll just pass you to Julia for some quick housekeeping. Thanks.
So to start off with, as this session will be focused on telling our story and how to do so, just a quick reminder to everyone to please be mindful of safe language throughout the session and just the effect that our words can have on others. I also just wanted to explain how speaking engagements usually work for Roses in the Ocean. So our busiest time of the year is from August to October, during which we have Are You OK Day, World Suicide Prevention Day, Mental Health Week and Month. And that is when the largest majority of requests come through from a whole variety of organisations and community groups looking for lived experience public speakers. So just to set the scene, that is our busiest time in the year. We do have a variety of requests that do sort of trickle throughout the rest of the year, but they're really the big days that go forward. A lot of those requests are also quite region specific, especially when talking about suicide. The preference is to definitely have that in person, both on our side as well as for the organisations that we work with in this. So a lot of the time when looking for a speaker, we're really, I suppose, confined to geographical locations, but we always take in mind the people in our collective who are willing, able and capable of sharing their stories.
Thanks, Julia. So the purpose of today's session is to draw on the insights around public speaking and storytelling, and to also, if you know, Julia mentioned that we have engagements at various times throughout the year, and sometimes of those year there's more engagements, but that doesn't mean that we can't all work on our stories in the meantime. So this is an opportunity for you to draw on James's experience and expertise, ask any of those questions that you want to ask around storytelling and public speaking to help you work on your story or work on engagements as and when they come up. James, we'll hand over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. Andrea, have we met before?
Just on the weekend at Emerald.
See, there we go. Yeah. So that's what I thought. And then I saw you in the gym a little bit after, but I was zoned into that. Anyway, that's another conversation. Great to see you again. So I've met you all before, which is fantastic. And thank you. And, you know, Nick and Julia, I'm not an expert. What I am is I've learnt from my mistakes. And I guess that allows me to kind of be a bit more confident about my story, about its structure, and navigating into how do I keep that journey or the next chapter of my story going? Because as you would appreciate, our stories, if we're still here, we're living in experience. I'll just pause there. Hello and welcome, Paula.
Oh, thank you. So sorry I'm late. I had massive trouble getting on. Sorry.
That's okay. Welcome. So we're literally just starting, and it's just, and you've probably all kind of heard a lot of my stories before, but I guess there's a lot of kind of things that I want to share up front and then just open up to questions. And the really important thing for me in my experience, and you've probably experienced this as well, having heard a number of your stories through various workshops, is understand why you want to share your story. Why do I want to share my story? What's the purpose of me sharing my story? And if you get a sense of that, it's going to make it a little bit easier. And I'm not saying I don't get anxious or nervous when it comes to storytelling. I absolutely do. If I'm working in, I do a lot of other public speaking and facilitation work into really large groups, I still have imposter syndrome. I still have that sense of, wow, am I the best person to do this? Am I going to be found out, or is my story strong enough? Does it connect with everyone? And I spent the best part of my early corporate roles thinking that I was really confident and really understood it, but was I competent? And that was a big shift for me to understand the difference between confident versus competent. And by that, I mean, what is your story that you want to share? What are the messages that you need your audience to hear? What's your idea or theme that you want to get out into the various lived experience communities or work that we do? And of course, making it more than just a sad story, making it a story where you do have a level of a request of your audience or a call to action as a result of hearing my messages or my story. I need you to do this. And in doing that, you can walk away knowing that you've done a great job. You're not going to be judged on how you speak. So what I've also found is pull back the pressure a little bit. Be kind to yourselves in what you share and how you share it. And also, as I say, be prepared to sometimes say no, as in, I'm not ready to share. It might be an anniversary, or I've literally just done X number of example or stories recently, or workshops, or I'm busy with work, and it's okay to say no. I know the team at Rose in the Ocean don't mind hearing that at all. Right? So be prepared to say no, because I don't want you to put yourselves into a position where you feel like you're obliged to say, yes, I'll do it, and for whatever reason, you're not ready. And what tends to happen with that is we get overwhelmed, and we might go into a part of our story that we weren't prepared to share. And I recently, with the Emerald team on the weekend, talked about this idea of know what you want to say, but also be very, very clear on what you don't want to say, and what areas you don't want to go into, whether it's because of an anniversary, or it's a difficult situation, or you can feel the vulnerability lump coming up in the throat, and it's not structured, your presentation, and you end up saying stuff you never wanted to say. Last thing I'll say before I open up questions, I did work with a lady recently, and she was so excited to be asked to be a part of the lived experience speakers opportunity. Really passionate, and up front, it wasn't with Rose in the Ocean, this individual's request to speak. And however, she contacted me, and we had a long conversation around her reasoning for doing the story, and she didn't know. And as we kind of unpacked it a little bit more, she also wasn't sure what she was going to say. And she also wasn't sure whether she'd been given permission to talk about the people in her story. She wasn't sure whether she wanted to talk about where the location was, the particular hospital that she went to, who she was supporting. She wasn't sure if she was going to talk about her name, and she also wasn't sure whether they were going to ask her for a photo of herself. And by me just asking those simple questions, had her really think about, hang on a minute, is this what I want to do? And so she put a pause on the process, thankfully, and we worked through it together over a week or so, coming back and forth. But had I not asked those what seemed like obvious questions, she would have gone into this experience not knowing what she was doing, and maybe cornered, or maybe saying things that she potentially couldn't retrieve back. So that's always been my kind of framework or guideline around, what do you want to say, why do you want to say it, and what are you actually going to say, and also what are you not going to say. So just thought I'd open that up with some of the experiences I've had in the past, and happy to respond to any questions, queries, or even examples that you've had. Open the floor.
Maybe I'm weird. Like I find it odd when we talk about it in this terms of sharing our story. Like in my brain, like when opportunities come up, it's or maybe it's just how it's been framed. Like, I mean, like with the summit, like, you know, I wasn't asked, do you want to share your story? I was asked, do you want to talk about the suitability of services? So to me, that was the question I was answering. And it just happens that in answering that, I give examples from my experiences. So I do find it a little odd when we sort of frame it very much like that focus on sharing the story. In my brain, it's kind of, I just throw bits of the story in that relate to the actual topic. So yeah.
Can I respond to that, Karen? Because that's a really important point. So if I get asked to, because I do a lot of work with other corporate wellbeing organisations, and I sometimes get asked to come and talk about men's health, physical and psychological health, or I'll ask to come in around and talk around communication. And so what I'll do is I will bring my lived experience story under that framework or big idea around communication. Because as you've probably heard in some of our workshops before, we remember things 22 times more if they're told to us via a story. Otherwise, I can give you the whole statistics around the goods and bads of communication, or men's health around what you should do versus what you shouldn't do. You know, alcohol, drug consumption, sleep, appetite, all that stuff. But without a lived experience story behind it, we're less likely to walk away remembering something. So it's a good point. So if you've been asked to talk about, as you did at the summit, you bring your expertise through your lived experience, which, as we know through the storytelling technique, the emotions that we connect with, we call the 4 C's. So we connect with this idea of curiosity. Who is Caroline? What's she about to talk about? What's her story? Oh, wow, I'm connected now all of a sudden, because she started off with this amazing story about, your battles with the system as such that I know of. And then the third C is this credibility, and that is our lived experience. So we've gone from curiosity, connection, to credibility. And the final C from an emotional point of view, when we're talking stories and the structure, is this sense of compulsion, of being curious, of connected. I understand the credibility. Now here's what I'm going to go away and do. And that's the power of storytelling. So you've been given a theme and you bring your lived experience story in to emphasize the particular points that you want to get across. Does that's kind of align with why we're telling stories? Yeah, nice. Yeah. Any other questions, comments, thoughts, uncertainties, or barriers that you might have come up against when it comes to sharing your stories?
Just leading on from what Caroline was saying. So I spoke at a corporate Are You OK event last year through Roses. And for me, I get a bit about, I guess, what each of you are saying. Because it was a corporate gig, it's very different to getting up amongst peers, say, for example, or a community event. And I think it was a good match because I've got a corporate background, and so I could speak their language, but I was also introducing, as you're saying, James, a new lens, I guess, looking at that through lived experience. So looking at Are You OK Day through my lens of lived experience, and bringing up what might be a bit taboo in that corporate environment around suicide. And so I had written my story twice through 2 different Voices of Insight workshops, and I had to write it again for the corporate event. I couldn't take what I'd already written. And so, yes, so I was bringing my lens of lived experience to the theme of Are You OK Day for this particular organisation. And through working with people at Roses and working with the organisation and with James was my mentor. Thank you, James, for stepping me through the process. And it was great to have someone to test things out with and that kind of thing. And so I found that fabulous, that I could go back to the story arc that James and Lane had gone through in the Voices of Insight workshop. And every time I've written my story, I've used the same story arc, but it's a different story. And I thought that was super awesome, because I guess I was thinking that there's corporate die and then there's lived experience die, but more and more they're coming together. And that was a really great example of where I could draw on my corporate experience and my lived experience of suicide for a specific theme around Are You OK Day. And I mean, and that took a lot of work and thought and effort and that kind of thing. But yeah, so I can kind of see what both of you are saying, and it's about picking where you thread in your parts of your lived experience. It's not like you rock up and you just go, well, this is my this is my lived experience. And so, you know, most of that conversation was not about suicide. You know, but there was a time where it was appropriate during that to talk about my lived experience of suicide as it applied to being corporate and Are You OK Day. And yeah, it's not easy, but that was a real learning and growth experience for me, I think. Yeah.
So, thanks, Di. I remember when I first started my storytelling journey about 6-7 years ago, and I was so nervous. Again, I thought, no, who's going to care about my story? My story just seems to be about me, and we've got to be very careful that when we share parts of our story, it's to service others. That's a really important part when we're sharing our lived experience. Otherwise, it's just a sad story. But so the service others parts is, what are the learnings that I've had, the hurdles I've had to get over, the mistakes I've made, the times I've fallen down on the canvas? Where can someone hear that and go, I'm not going to make that same mistake James did, because he's given me that opportunity to learn from that. But to your point too, Di, if I take our mind just off the lived experience stuff for a second, and that being, if we, for argument's sake, if you write a resume, I'd imagine everyone's had or written a resume in the past. You don't always have the same resume for every job you apply for. Now, by what that I mean is you change your resume according to the role you apply for. You actually start to match the language, you pick up the key competencies or the key selection criteria in the job ad, and you'll massage the about section or maybe even parts of the resume so it matches. It's a natural link to that particular role that you're applying for. It's the same as when we're sharing our lived experience story to different audiences. So as you said, Di, if you're at Are You OK Day versus a corporate versus an under-19 boys football team or a girls netball team, and I think of all the kind of organisations and particular places I've presented or shared my story, it requires, for it to be successful, and you're the only judge of that success, it requires, hi Paul, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you.
Just talking about the idea of matching your lived experience story to the request of the organisation who might be asking you to speak. So, but it requires you to actually do a little bit of homework into, what is this organisation? What do they want me to talk about? Spending a bit of time, right, so of my story, what might resonate? Now, you never know what's going to resonate with who, but can I adjust my story a little bit? No, so for Di, with your example, the corporate or the Are You OK, it might be that you lodge a bit more data and statistics when it comes to a corporate level, because that's the language they're more likely going to connect with. But of course, you're still bringing the lived experience story in with that. And I know when I'm working with a school group, say a year 12 group, or even an under 14 football side where I used to coach, I'm changing the language a little bit. Okay, we can be very mindful of that language. And safe language is critical, not just for the audience, but for you. Right? That becomes a self-care. So I'm not up there talking about the challenges of my almost 19-year-old son, his health battle. So I don't need to talk about that, because I get quite emotional very quickly, and I find it very difficult to remain on path what I'm talking about. So that's aligned with that idea of, what don't I want to talk about? I don't necessarily need to talk too much about the loss of my brother on his 35th birthday, and mum and dad leaning over the hospital bed singing happy birthday to him because it was an hour past his birth date. When I go down that path, I just get quite emotional. And in all reality, that's not really critical for the audience to hear. So I'm not trying to shock and awe the audience, because it's not servicing me. I want to be able to service them, and what are the learnings? So again, the more comfortable you get with a structure around your story or your idea or your messages, it will start to evolve. Like I said before, we do evolve our messages depending on how much we want to share versus who our audience might be. So as we get comfortable, you might start to think about, how can I adjust this a little bit? And Caroline, that might be from your experience as well, is how has my story either changed slightly, or is there something I might add in based on the ongoing conversations I'm having in this space? And that's the ideal, the hook that people want to hear more about. So you know what, I might explore a little bit more about that and share a bit more about that next time. So it probably evolves bigger and bigger. And from a structure point of view, it's always important to think about, how long is my story? If I'm asked to speak for 30 minutes and I've got a 15-minute story, what am I going to do for the next 15 minutes? You're probably going to get pretty anxious by it. So either tell them, no, my story will be 15 minutes, or start thinking about, what other examples have I got that align with my messages? Don't try and give too much in your story. I always try and consider this idea, anything more than 3 messages, for those that have been on workshops before, we're unlikely going to remember anything more than 3. And you're just going to overwhelm yourself with trying to give too much. So you might just keep your 3 messages as an example and go, you know what, here's 3 lived experience stories that align to that message. Or if I've got only 10 minutes or 15 minutes to speak, here's just one example of that. So don't overdo it. And for those that have seen me present before, allow the power of the pause. Allow the time to just sit, where you give an example, you give a story, and don't rush into the next story. Just allow that to sit and absorb with your audience. And it might even be what I in the last year or so, this kind of different structure in my storytelling is asking questions of the audience, not necessarily that I'm asking them to respond back, but getting them to think about it. And I did one recently, a regional one. It was, who do you talk to about your challenges? Do you keep secrets to yourself? Is that a good way for your own self-care? And it was particularly for a group of men. Now, I wasn't expecting them to answer, but I wanted them to reflect on it. And me asking that same question at the start, in the middle, and at the end demonstrated that I seriously wanted them to think about, who are their communication or support network? When you lie loudest, you lie to yourself, you know. And I had a theme of this idea that we've got to be comfortable to talk about our own challenges. So just some little minor tips. I've done a number of public speaking courses in my kind of corporate roles, and 2 things I remember. One, I was always anxious. The other one was something that my mentor at the time said, James goes, when you're speaking to a group, don't call it public speaking. When you say public speaking, people go, I'm not a good public speaker. We all are, right? But we just put pressure on ourselves. So we're just sharing stories. To your point, Caroline, it's just short story sharing. We do it the whole time. We watch stories, we hear stories, we engage with stories. We all do it. We're all natural storytellers. It's just the pressure we put on ourselves as to whether we're good or not, and that's only our own judgment. Here's the thing I learned from that mentor in the public speaking space. A structure as simple as this. When you're sharing a story, you tell them what you're about to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you just told them. It's as simple as that. I don't know, that's not simple, but it's the introduction, it's a body, and it's a conclusion. Right? That's what we learned through school when if we did essays. I somehow managed to get out of all that stuff, having spent so much time in hospital. I got away from all that kind of stuff, and I guess I grew into storytelling when I got into the university space. But tell them what you're about to tell them. So introduce, here's what my story's about. Here's my theme or my idea. And say, wow, okay, yeah, this is interesting. That's your curiosity space. Tell them what you've just told them. So this is that idea of, here's my story, here are my messages, here are my examples. And a reminder as tell them what you just told them. That's your summary. Today we've talked about, today I've shared with you. If you can keep to a simple structure, you're more likely going to, or more or less likely going to get kind of tied up or in a tangle around what are you sharing. And so I said there was only 2 things. There's one last thing I remember. when you're sharing your story in an arena, and by that I mean to other people, don't hold something in your hand, because inevitably it will shake without you having any control of it. Now, what that tends to do is people watch the pen or people watch the bit of paper. So if you've got an option to put something down in front of you, if you need to read it, by all means do. But I just remember I used to tap the podium with a pen, and it was in front of more than 500 year 10, 11 students and their parents at a school function one night. And one of the parents came up and he said, "Matt, were you conducting something? Because you just tapped the whole way." And I do not even remember holding that pen. Now, so we just don't remember that stuff. So remove any of that stress kind of stuff for you. And sometimes the way I preface that, if I've started off in my speaking processes, I'll open up with, "Oh, I'm feeling a bit nervous." And for some reason, that takes away a bit of the nerves. But if you pretend you're not nervous and you are nervous for the next 15 minutes, all you're doing is being nervous. Now, it doesn't matter, as I said, it's a self-assessment thing, but I'd remove any opportunity for things to shake. You don't see newsreaders holding things other than a microphone, and that's okay. But just try and remove any of that sort of shakeability if you can. Di, question, comment?
Yeah, I have a question around, I guess, you've talked about safe language and that kind of thing. I'm just wondering around, is it the responsibility of the speaker around supporting people? So for example, if you're speaking, you're sharing part of your story and someone in the audience is activated, I guess, where does the responsibility of the speaker start and stop? Where does the responsibility of the organisation or the convener or whoever it is start and stop in terms of that safety and support?
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of ways around that. It's the onus is on you as the sharer. What am I sharing? What's my story? Sometimes I would always go through it and go, "What's in here? What's the language I want to use? Do I need to use that language? Do I need to share that part of the story?" Obviously, I'm not necessarily talking about method, but it might be a location, it might be trauma, it might be domestic violence, whatever it might be. If you're not sure, I'd share it with someone before you're going to share. And another way of doing that is you might put a disclaimer up front. You might say, "Today we're talking about," because I went into a workshop, men's health, and it was with the Australian Grand Prix Corporation last year. And I was asked to come in and talk about men's psychosocial health and mental health. And I did. And I went, but of course, I talked about my lived experience. And I remember one person just going, "Oh, I wasn't ready for that." Now, it wasn't a bad thing, but in hindsight, I probably should have checked in with the organiser, say, well, I kind of did, but I just don't know whether they pass it on, that today we're going to be talking about this. Right? And sometimes if it's in a large group, particularly in a school group, I'll check to see is there an on-site counsellor or a mentor or a carer that might be available in case it does activate any of the participants during the course of the presentation. But I guess, in short, it's making sure that you know what you're saying and you're very, when I say careful, you're very mindful of where the language might have an impact in a negative way for people. Having said that, we don't want it to be a vanilla approach where you go in and don't say anything. You know, I read an article on LinkedIn. Tanya, one of our Rose in the Ocean Collective, wrote it, I think it was mid last year. It was a great article about, you know, we have to remove the stigma of not talking about suicide. And it was a great article. She wrote very well. And my comment in there was, a little play on words, but I said, "I agree, Tanya, we have to move the from suicide." That was just a little play on words, because if we're not talking about it, we're not creating impact. But just be mindful of where possible, because you don't always know your audience. Hence why when we run our workshops, we don't talk about method, because you don't know the impact it might have. We don't even know the stories of individuals. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're literally trying to step back from what you've said. So I'd put a disclaimer up front. I would ensure that you're very clear on what you're going to say, and maybe check in with the organiser first. Say, hey, look, I'm coming to speak next week. Is there anything I might need to be aware of? So you really are doing your homework. And with that all said, you can't always guarantee that it's going to go perfect, but see how you go.
It's interesting, Di, that you say that, because I have actually done a lived experience to service providers with my workplace, and that actually happened to me. And, you know, like the participants knew what the context of the workshop was, which is all, you know, post-suicide. But a lady that was in the audience got really upset after I, you know, did my speech. And I've done my speech before. I've had, you know, a person walk out on our speech during my speech, but this one was, you know, straight away I went into, you know, fix it mode, and oh my God, I've got to help this poor woman. So just sort of in response to what you were saying, it was me that actually went over, because at the end I could see she was really upset, and she had work colleagues and stuff with her, but you know, basically I just went up to her and just sort of said to her, you know, I can see you're upset, but I just want you to know that my life's good, and, you know, I'm happy in my life. And, you know, it sort of, it was good and it was hard as well, but it opened up that conversation for me to be able to, I suppose, reassure her that, you know, even though X has happened and it was catastrophic, life is fine, you know, in time. That, because really, I suppose my speech is to give people hope and to, I suppose, allow service providers permission to not be so scared by, you know, when there is a suicide that they have to deal with, because let's face it, you know, it's probably the most terrifying thing that they're going to hear or have to deal with, and to just sort of give them that hope that they can deal with that, and, you know, they can help people by not really having to do a lot at all, but, you know, witness it and listen to it and things like that. But yeah, it's also scary. It was scary.
And you raised something interesting, Paula, because I think, you know, a lot of people want to hear the stories that have a happy ending. The problem is, and a lot of us probably on this call, we haven't got to the happy ending.
Yeah.
We're still living with it, because we often talk about lived experience like it's in the past, you know, and we've been through this stuff and now it's all good. For some of us, it's not all good. And those stories need to be told as well. And for me, I think it can be, there's this pressure I sometimes feel that, you know, you've got to have hope at the end of your story, and it's got to have a positive spin and this and that and the other. And don't get me started on positivity, but yeah, obviously I don't want to leave people down in the ditch. You know what I mean? Like when you've got that story arc and you know, you've gone right down. I don't want to leave them down there. But sometimes life is not good. We're speaking about our stories while we're living our stories. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear other people's perspectives around this, you know, how we share our living experience safely. Because, yeah, a lot of great work is being done around, you know, stigma and shame around lived experience. But I think there's still this bit of a blockage around, I'm still in the mess of it. You know, I'm okay to share while I'm in the mess of it. But I can't give you the happy ending at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Di, can I just maybe respond to that? And I agree with you. You know, that we're changing the language from lived to living experience, and yeah, we're absolutely living. But I regularly share the story that I lost my best mate on the 1st of May, almost 2 years ago. The night before, I've been talking to him. I've been best mates with him for close to 40 years, and he took his life on the 1st of May. To me, that's another chapter of my story. that's another sharing of my story. And sadly, as you say, when we're still here living, we're still here growing, we're still here learning. Yes, it's hard to find sometimes the positivity and hope through our stories. And as I was sharing that story over the last year, sadly, my 50-year-old cousin took his life on New Year's Eve just past. Right, so again, I'm going through this incredibly bloody tough journey, as we all are. But for me, careful I say this, but for me, it's almost like a Seinfeld episode where you get to the 36 minutes of a Seinfeld episode and it says to be continued. And you go, what? I wanted to watch it all now. And so you have to wait for the next episode, right? That's the way I see it. I'm just going through episodes in a life story. And you're right, it's not always happy endings, to think of a better word. It's not always positivity. It's not always hope. But if you can share it in a way that allows people to connect and go, you know what, I'm going through some pretty similar stuff, but I'm going to navigate a little bit differently from the experience that you're sharing. And so that it does create a sense of hope. Maybe not to you in the way you describe it, but I might look at it from perception and go, you know what, wow, Di's been through some pretty tough stuff. I'm going through some similar stuff. What can I do to slightly adjust the course I'm on so it does feel like there's going to be another chapter or another episode or whatever it looks like? Because you're right, Di, that's what life's about, right? It's not meant to be easy. My mum used and regularly said to me, I had our kids through the IVF, and it was an expensive process, and it was a drawn out process, because for those that know, you don't know if it's going to work until it works, right? And we had 3 tries on that, very unsuccessful, very painful, very expensive, very emotionally draining. And I remember Mum telling me a story, and this is just so ridiculous. The kids were almost 2, they're twins. They were almost 2, and it was tough. I didn't know another way, but it was tough. And I rang Mum. I said, they're driving me mad. It's so hard. I was busy with work. I was struggling. And I rang Mum and I said, what do I do? And she goes, James, you wanted them. You paid for them. You deal with them. And she hung up. That was a really good experience. It wasn't positive. It was a bloody negative way of telling a story. But it helped me kind of learn, what do I need to do here? And I guess that's a key when we're sharing our story. We're not expecting everybody to connect with our stories. If you think that's going to happen, you've set yourself up to fail. And I set myself up to fail many, many times. I thought everyone would laugh. I thought everyone would love my story. I thought everyone would connect with it. And I presented once to more than 1,000 people when I was in a previous job. And I walked off the stage devastated, because I set myself up to fail. When you're out there sharing your lived experience story, you may not connect with everyone. But what you will do is you will connect with someone. And here's another thing, you may not even know who that one person is. And that's okay. Don't even go looking. Just know you've given it your best job. You've given it your best go. You put it in the best structure. I think it's a really important thing. And we talk about this idea, every story matters. Regardless of whether you think your story is strong enough or not. Regardless if you think there's a hierarchy of lived experience, of course there's not. But every story matters to someone. It's just sharing your story for the benefit of others. And sometimes, in fact, I've had people come up to me after an event through an email or a text saying, hey, thanks so much. I didn't even know they were there. So take that pressure off yourself to make it a positive experience for everyone. Because you'll set yourself up to go, you know what, this is too hard for me, I'm not going to do it. Don't give up. Sharing your story of vulnerability, for me, is an incredibly powerful process. And it's actually become one of my superpowers, to the dismay of my children, that when they see me cry, they go, oh, Dad, really? But I love it, A, because it embarrasses them, but it allows me to open up. And if I can open up and share, what we find is that allows others to explore their experience, or maybe, you know, talk about something, because it took me 44 years to talk about my experience. But what I realized, for those that have heard my story in the past, that idea that if I can share my story, it allows others to open up. And that took me a long time, but now I'm kind of on this wave of, wow, I didn't realize the power of what I thought was a useless story. So to your point, Di, it might not always be positive. That's okay, as long as you're asking your audience to do something rather than leaving with that negative feeling like, oh, wow, what's going on with Di? I thought I was the one that needed help. Maybe it's Di, and I'm just using that as an example. But you don't want to leave. You don't want to leave your audience in a situation like the Seinfeld episode and that to be continued episode never comes on, because they go, I'm not watching that ever again. I'm just using that as a kind of a metaphor to make sure you leave your audience with something to do. And it doesn't always need to be a positive story, because if it is, we're not having the tough conversations. Any other kind of hurdles that people come up against in sharing their stories?
I've got a question for you, James. So I think it's quite common when we do get speaking engagements that the speaker's asked to speak for a certain period of time, and then usually it's open for Q&A. And I've done that myself as a speaker before, and then you get to the Q&A and it's just silent in the room and everyone's staring at you, blank face, just there like, would anyone like to say anything? How do you navigate that? What do you find is a good, I suppose, recipe for success in getting responses, or do you just leave it? How would you?
So if you don't ask, you don't learn. No, look, what I would do is I would prepare some questions for that awkward silence. Again, it depends on your comfort level and your experience in it. But I would go, you know what? Just in case nobody has any questions, I might give you some example questions that I've had in the past. And you set it up. They don't necessarily need to be ones that have actually been asked, but think about what was the journey like for me when I first started? What are some tips? And so what you're doing is you're asking a question, but you're just giving them more content. I wouldn't leave if for argument's sake, it's a 15-minute presentation and you're there for half an hour, you don't want to leave in 15 minutes. You kind of feel like, oh, God, that was awkward. So I'd, in some respect, have some prepared questions that you think they probably should ask, even though they're not going to ask it. Because what I've sometimes found is people are so nervous. You think of maybe a corporate event, for example, and you've got people who actually know each other in the corporate roles, they work together, and nobody wants to put their hand up and ask a question because they might feel like they're stupid, or it might expose a little bit about their own challenges as well. And so I'd prepare some questions and pose them, but then answer them. So by that I mean, some people have asked me in the past, so if no one's got any questions, I might give you some examples of questions I've had in the past. And that might probe another question. Or you might say, there's no silly questions, don't be embarrassed. You know, the best way that we support each other in the workplace is to get to know each other a little bit more. So has anybody got any questions that they want to share, or ideas or experiences? So you could turn it, so you could turn it around to not necessarily a question, but just a little bit of a conversation from the group as well. But I wouldn't leave the silence. That feels awkward. Again, you put pressure on yourself. You go, they weren't listening to me. They don't care. They just want to get out of here. Bugger it. They're there for a time. They're there for a reason. Hold the space and prepare some questions that might have them ask some questions themselves. It's challenging, right? But again, it comes back to this concept of preparation. Am I prepared? Do I know my story? One of the things I wrote down I want to share is this concept of, have you forecast how your story might go in a session? What does it look like? And I do this with almost everything. I lay awake at night. I'm not suggesting to that, but I think, oh my gosh, I'm about to do a presentation at this location. Here's what might happen. Here's how I'm going to kind of start. Here's what I'm going to wear. Right? I always kind of get worried about what I'm going to wear, and that stems back from a really awkward situation when I was working in the HR space. I worked across 110 work centres across Victoria, and one of them was the far east of Victoria. And I had to, with one of the general managers, go out one day to do a presentation on work redundancy. It was really awkward. It was a tough conversation. There were union delegates there. There were, blue collar, long serving employees, and I had to talk about how we're going to reduce the work size in that particular region. And it was tough, it was hard. And I was thinking about it the night before, what am I going to wear? I'll wear that beautiful French cuff collared shirt that I've got with those beautiful cufflinks, and I'll go out there. So I'm in the city and I'm going out to the region. I'd get out there, I'd do the presentation with the GM, think it was fairly polished. I walk away quite smug with myself. I was in my kind of early 30s. Came back to the workplace, and I was talking to one of the girls, and she goes, "Oh, where have you been for the last day?" I said, "Oh, I was down at Wilson's Prom." And she goes, "Oh, now it all makes sense." I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Oh, I had spoken to one of the people down there. They said they had a conversation about redundancies and redeployment, and they had the GM there, and they couldn't work out who the other toff was from HR." I was devastated. So not just your story, just think a little bit about how you're projecting yourself. I never wore French cufflinks again. I just said, that's it. So that's just as you get a little bit more confident about your story, it's preparation. What does the place look like? What's the venue like? How many are going to be there? What do I wear that's not offensive, or it's not going to draw too much attention on me? What's the message I'm getting across? What are the questions they might ask? Even forecasting the questions they might ask. And if they don't, what questions could I ask? To Julia's point, if there's a Q&A time. So it all comes down to preparation. The more you do it, the more you'll know, the more you'll learn from your mistakes as well. And with all of it, be kind to yourselves. Don't put that pressure on yourself. Be mindful of your language as well. Less stigmatizing language, but don't sanitize it too much.
Yeah. Hey, James. The other thing was with that Are You OK day, because they asked you to talk for about half an hour, and like you were saying before, my story wasn't that long. And so what I did was I actually got them to break up into groups and do a couple of really short activities. And you and I talked about this, and we weren't quite sure how it would go, but with my corporate background, I thought sometimes people don't want to just sit and listen for that amount of time with a really heavy topic. And because I'd done my homework, so I'd asked the contact there what were the key issues they were facing in in the mental health, psychosocial space and that kind of thing. And so I based the activities around that so that they could apply it directly to that. And I was, after talking to you, I was prepared. Is there going to be this awkward silence at the end of the activities? But they all had these really great conversations, and I just sort of traveled around the room as they were discussing things. And, a person from each group got up afterwards and shared some ideas. And then I weaved that into the call to action, for the organisation to take those ideas that they'd come up with that day and then put them into place, and even a time frame around how they could do. There was 3 very specific things I was asking them to do over the next, I think it was one thing that week, and then one thing that month, and then one thing that quarter. And I believe, the feedback came back through Roses in the Ocean that they really enjoyed doing those activities. So for me, there's that, if your story's say 15 minutes, but they want you there for half an hour, for me, that was another way of going, okay, can I make this half an hour? If it's going to be half an hour, how do I make this so I don't feel overburdened or trying to pad out my speech, but also make it useful for them? Because there's nothing worse than these days like Are You OK Day, where it can be really tokenistic, rah, and everyone gets together and has morning tea, but nothing changes. And so I wanted to leave them and challenge them, because, the HR director was there. There was some quite senior people there, as well as other people. And so, I've got no idea what happened. I guess that's the one thing for me about speaking versus, say, consulting, is that you don't know. Like you walk away, and so sometimes I think back and I'm like, I wonder if they actually did anything with that. It'd be really interesting to find out.
Yeah, and that example, thanks, John, that example is very much, you've got to be confident that that's what they want to do, and they're going to have that conversation, because you don't want it to be in a situation, we talked about this, the idea that you're getting into small groups and exercises, and all of a sudden the conversation goes a little bit off track for whatever reason, whether it's language or, you know, people aren't interested or check out or whatever, which I'm not suggesting they will, but that comes with a lot of preparation, that process. So yeah, well done. We'll see. Any other
And
questions?
I did run that by the convener as well, because I put that to them to say, I'm thinking of doing this, what do you think? And they replied that yes, this group that was coming, you know, they're not shrinking violets, you know, there's quite a number of them that are quite happy to get involved and then share stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, well done. Any other questions, comments, uncertainties, experiences?
If we don't have any more questions, can you believe it? We're now coming up to the end of an hour. So that has gone incredibly quickly. I'd like to thank James for sharing a myriad of helpful guidelines and tips. And I hope that you've all gained a lot of value out of this session. I know I certainly have. I've just written a bit of a summary of stuff. Well, in fact, I've written 2 pages, James, but I think that I'll just the things that I'll take away in particular is, you know, why do we want to share our stories? Know what you want to say, know what you don't want to say. How does our story serve others? Being really sure that you ask yourself all those important questions that you mentioned at the beginning, James, and be prepared to say no. I think everybody who's worked with us as a speaker knows that they can come to us right up until the 11th hour and say, or you know, an hour before, it's like, look, I'm not ready for this, and that's absolutely okay. You know, we're more than happy with that. And every story matters, right? Because it's going to matter to someone. And be kind to yourself. So along with all the other stuff, those were the things that I drew out. The 4 C's were really were really helpful as well, James. Curiosity, connection, credibility, and what was that last one?
Compulsion.
Compulsion. I thought it was compulsion.
Yeah, I feel compelled to go and do something.
Yeah, but I was writing so quickly that yeah. So those are the things that I drew out. Just in answer to your question, I just wanted to cover this really quickly, Di, around supports. When we work with speakers at Roses in the Ocean, we're very mindful of this, and we will ensure that the organization who we partner with, along with our speaker, has that support and scaffolding around them before, during, and after. It's very important to us that both our speaker and the audience are supported appropriately. So we put a lot of work behind having that effective communication during the, you know, and wrapping that around the whole engagement experience, so that everybody feels comfortable and everybody knows that if they need to or they want to, there's support available for them. So I just thought I'd mention that. James is back on the 5th of June. I can't wait. Julia, you just wanted to cover a few things about the next learning development session in the poll.
That's right. So as Nick said, our next session for the Speakers Hub is 5th of June. We also have our national mentoring service that's available to every single collective member. So if you have an engagement coming up, or if you just want to work a bit further one-on-one to do some mentoring regarding your story or any engagement that you're doing within the suicide prevention space, you're more than welcome to reach out to Nicola and myself through the engagement at Roses in the Ocean email address. And we will partner you with a mentor, one of which is our incredible James. So we will always be able to provide that additional one-on-one support to everyone as well, if you like that. At the end of the session, when you log off, you will be sent a poll. Just if you have 2 minutes. It probably won't even take 2 minutes of your time to please fill that in and let us know how you feel coming away from this session, as this is our pilot, but first time that we've done this as well, to make sure that we're always continually improving and helping answer the questions that really matter to you.
Thanks, Julie. And thank you to each and every one of you for coming today and for contributing. It's been such a valuable session and we hope you've enjoyed it.
Can I leave you with a quote? I feel like I need to bookend it with something special. at the
Thank
end.
you, James. We'd love that.
There's a great little lived experience video that we watch in one of our workshops from a guy called Dominic Colenso. And he says a number of beautiful things in there, but he talks about this idea of telling our stories an act of vulnerability. And when we give our stories voice, the power multiplies. And I genuinely believe that your story is yours to tell. And when you're ready to do so, it is absolutely an act of generosity. So be kind to yourself in how you share your story. And as we've said a couple of times, every story matters. So look after yourselves. Thanks for being a part of the group and certainly the organising team. And no doubt I'll see you on the road somewhere, or if not online.